My billionaire father disowned me for marrying a poor man. He didn't even lower his voice when he said it.
No NFTs.
No trust fund. You're on your own now. 200 guests went silent around US, crystal glasses frozen midair, every eye locked on me like I was some kind of public mistake. I remember the sound most. Not his voice. Not the whispers. The sound of my own heart, louder than the string quartet playing in the corner. And then, I felt it. Ethan's hand in mine. Steady.
Warm.
Unmoving. I turned to him, expecting something. Anger. Embarrassment.
Fear.
But he just smiled. Like he knew something I didn't. Like this was all part of a story he'd already read to the end. He leaned in close, his voice low, just for me.
Don't worry.
That was it. 2 words.
Come.
Certain. And somehow, that terrified me more than my father's threat. Because I didn't know what he meant.
And I didn't know what was coming.
Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? My name is Hannah Bennett. I'm 29 years old. And 6 months after that night, the night my father cut me out of his life in front of 200 people, my parents would stand frozen in a room full of billionaires, staring at my husband like they'd never seen him before. But that story doesn't start at the wedding. It starts much earlier. It starts with a number. $18 million. That's what my trust fund was worth when I turned 25. I didn't build it. I didn't earn it. It was just there. Like everything else in my family. My brother, Jason, got his first investment at 23. $2.5 million to start a tech company he ran into the ground in under a year. My father called it a learning experience. When I asked for $50,000 to expand my small design business, he called it an emotional decision. There was always a difference between us. Jason was an asset. I was a liability. Not because I failed, but because I didn't fit the model. I didn't speak like them. I didn't network like them. I didn't treat relationships like transactions. And that was my first mistake. My second was Ethan. I met him on a Tuesday, 2:14 p.m., a coffee shop in Brooklyn that my family would have called charming, in that way that really means beneath us. He was sitting in the corner, wearing a simple navy button-down, sleeves rolled up, a notebook open in front of him. Not a laptop, a notebook. Who even does that anymore? I spilled my coffee before I even ordered. It splashed across the counter, dripping onto the floor. Embarrassing.
Messy.
Very.
Me.
And he just reached over, grabbed a stack of napkins and said, "Happens more than you think."
No judgment.
No performance. Just
come.
We talked for 10 minutes, then 20, then an hour. He never asked what my last name was. Never asked what I did in that calculated way people usually do when they're trying to figure out your value. He just listened. And when he spoke, it was different. He asked questions that made me pause. Questions that made me realize how used I was to people hearing me, but not really seeing me. He saw everything. And yet, he looked like nothing my family would ever take seriously. No watch.
No designer labels.
No driver waiting outside. Just a man with a notebook and eyes that missed nothing. I should have known then, but I didn't, because I was still thinking in their language. Money. Status. Signals. I didn't realize. I was looking at the wrong metrics. The first time I brought him home, my father didn't even try to hide it. He shook Ethan's hand, held it a second too long, and said, "What do you do?" Ethan smiled. Same calm smile. "I work with companies." My father's lips tightened. "What kind of companies?" "A beat. Just a small one. The kind that needs solving." It sounded vague. Too vague. My father hated vague. He liked titles. Structure. Hierarchy. This was none of that. Dinner was worse. My mother asked about his background 3 times in different ways. My brother didn't even bother engaging. And my father, he went quiet, which, in our house, was never a good sign. That night, as we drove back to my apartment, I apologized.
I'm sorry.
They can be a lot. Ethan just looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. They're very certain people,
He said.
I laughed. That's one way to put it.
He turned to me then.
And this is the part one keep replaying in my head. Over and over. Certainty, he said softly, is often just a lack of information. I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not then. But 6 months later, standing in that room, watching my father's face drain of color as he realized exactly who my husband was, I finally did. The first time I realized my family did not measure love the way other families did, I was 16 years old, standing in our driveway at exactly 7:32 in the morning, watching a brand new black Mercedes-Benz get unloaded from a transport truck with a red ribbon tied across the hood. It was not mine. It was my brother Jason's. He had just gotten his driver's license 3 days earlier, and my father stood there with his hands behind his back, smiling in that quiet, satisfied way he reserved for what he called good investments. $218,000, he said, not to Jason, but to the driver, like he needed the number spoken out loud. Jason laughed, ran his hand across the hood, already calling his friends. My mother took pictures. I stood on the porch in my school uniform, holding a backpack with a broken zipper I had been using for almost 2 years. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did. In my family, not noticing was a choice. That same afternoon, I asked my father if I could get a replacement laptop for school. Mine would shut down after 30 minutes, and the battery had swollen so much the keyboard tilted slightly upward. He did not look up from his phone when he answered. We already spent a lot this quarter. That was it. No discussion.
No consideración.
Just a line item decision. I remember standing there, calculating it in my head. $218,000 for a car. 0 for something I actually needed. That was the day I stopped asking. Not because I did not need things, but because I finally understood the system. Everything in our house had a return on investment. Jason had one. I did not. Years later, when I was 22, that system became even clearer. Jason graduated from college with a degree in business management. My father hosted a celebration dinner at a private club in Manhattan. 40 guests. Imported wine. A custom menu that cost $300 per person. At the end of the night, my father stood up, raised his glass, and announced that he would be funding Jason's first company. $2.5 million. People applauded. Some even stood. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a press release. I was sitting 3 seats away, wearing a dress I had bought on clearance for $68. When the applause died down, my father looked at me briefly, like he had just remembered something minor. Hannah is also working on something creative. A few polite smiles. A nod from someone who clearly did not care. And then the conversation moved on. That was my introduction. Not my work. Not my effort. Just a vague footnote. But here is the part that matters. I was not failing. I had built a small design business for my apartment. Branding packages. Website layouts. Independent clients. I was making around $4,000 a month. It was not impressive by my family standards. But it was mine. I paid my own rent. I paid my own bills. I learned everything myself. And when I finally gathered the courage to ask my father for help scaling it, just once, just $50,000 to hire 2 people and expand my client base, he leaned back in his chair and asked me a question I will never forget. What is the projected return? I started explaining. Growth rates. Client retention. Market demand. He listened for about 20 seconds before cutting me off. It sounds emotional. Emotional. That was the word he used when something did not fit into his model. Emotional meant unpredictable. Emotional meant risky. Emotional meant no. Jason's failed company was a lesson. My stable, growing business was a liability. I nodded. I said I understood. I left the room. And that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at my laptop screen, realizing something that felt both painful and strangely freeing. There was no version of me that would ever qualify in their system. Not smarter, not richer, not more successful, because the problem was never my performance. It was my category, and categories in my family did not change. So I stopped trying to earn something that was never going to be given. I built, quietly. I worked longer hours. I learned faster. I stopped sharing updates. And over time something shifted, not in them, in me. I no longer needed their approval to measure my progress. But I still did not understand the full picture. Not until Ethan. Because when I met him, I thought I had finally stepped outside the system. I thought I had chosen something different. Someone different. Someone simple. Someone real. Someone who did not calculate every interaction like a transaction. And, in a way, I was right. He was different. Just not in the way I thought. Because while my family measured everything in numbers, Ethan measured everything in patterns. And what I did not realize then was that he had already mapped out my entire world long before I understood his. I did not fall in love with Ethan all at once. It was not dramatic. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was quieter than that. Slower. Almost unnoticeable. The second time we met, he was already sitting at the same table in that coffee shop. Same notebook, same calm expression, like he had never left. I remember checking the time when I walked in. 2:11 p.m. 3 minutes earlier than the day before. I told myself it was a coincidence. He looked up, saw me, and smiled just slightly, not surprised, not performative, just aware. "You are early today," he said. Not hello. Not good afternoon. Just an observation. I sat down across from him, still holding my bag, still unsure why I had come back. "So are you," I replied. He closed his notebook slowly, deliberately. "I am usually early," he said. "It gives me time to watch how things settle." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Watch how things settle. At the time, I thought he meant the coffee shop, the people, the routine. I did not realize he meant everything. We started meeting there almost every day. Not planned. Not scheduled. Just happening. And the more time I spent with him, the more something began to feel different. Not exciting. Not overwhelming. Stable. Like standing on solid ground after years of not realizing you had been slightly off balance. He never tried to impress me. Never asked about my family name. Never reacted when I casually mentioned things most people would latch onto immediately. The houses. The connections. The numbers. It was like those details did not register as important to him. And that confused me, because in my world, those were the only things that mattered. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after we met, I asked him directly, "Why do you not ask?" He looked up from his coffee, tilting his head slightly. "Ask what?"
About me. My background.
"My family." He considered that for a moment, not dismissing it, not rushing to answer, just thinking. Then he said, "Because you already told me everything I need to know." I laughed a little too quickly. "I have barely told you anything." He shook his head once. "You told me how you react when things go wrong. You told me how you make decisions when nobody is watching. You told me what you choose to build when there is no guarantee anyone will notice." A pause. Just a small one. But it landed. That is more useful than a last name. I did not know what to say to that. Because he was right. And because nobody had ever said something like that to me before. Not in my family. Not in my entire life. In my world, people asked about your last name first. Everything else came after. Or did not come at all. With Ethan, it was the opposite. And slowly, without realizing it, I started changing. I stopped mentioning my family. Not because I was hiding it, but because it felt irrelevant. I talked about my work instead. My clients. My ideas. The things I was building. And he listened. Always listened. Not the way people pretend to listen while waiting for their turn to speak. But fully. Completely. Like what I was saying actually mattered. And when he responded, it was different. He did not just agree. He did not just encourage. He challenged. Quietly.
Precisely.
Why did you price it that way? What happens if your client leaves tomorrow? What part of this actually creates value? At first, it made me uncomfortable. Then it made me think. Then it made me better. My business started to grow. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But steadily. More structured. More intentional. And I realized something I had not expected. Ethan was not teaching me what to do.
He was teaching me how to see.
One night, about 2 months in, we were walking down a quiet street after dinner. Nothing expensive. Just a small place with good food and no reservations. The kind of place my family would never go. I remember the exact temperature. 68 degrees. Slight breeze. The city felt softer somehow. I asked him a question I had been avoiding. What do you actually do? He smiled just a little. That same calm smile. I told you. You said you work with companies.
Ido.
I stopped walking. That is not an answer. He turned to face me, hands in his pockets, completely at ease. It is the only answer that matters right now. That should have bothered me. It should have felt evasive, suspicious. But it did not, because there was something in the way he said it. Not defensive, not secretive, just certain. Like there was a timeline I did not understand yet. I looked at him for a long second, trying to read something in his expression. Anything. But there was nothing to read. Just calm. So I let it go. And that was the moment. Not when I fell in love, but when I chose to trust him. Without full information. Without guarantees. Without the kind of certainty my family demanded for every decision. And that was the real break. Not the wedding. Not the confrontation. That quiet decision, on a street where nobody was watching, where nothing looked significant, that was the moment everything changed. Because from that point on, I was no longer playing by their rules. I was stepping into something else. Something I did not fully understand yet. Something Ethan had already been navigating long before I met him. And the closer I got to him, the more I began to feel it. That quiet, underlying tension. Like standing near something powerful that has not revealed itself yet. Not loud, not obvious, but there. Always there. Waiting. The only person in my family who did not immediately dismiss Ethan was my grandfather. Charles Bennett did not speak often at family gatherings. He did not need to. When he entered a room, conversations adjusted without anyone acknowledging it. Not because he demanded attention, but because he had built the foundation everything else stood on. The company, the connections, the reputation my father now carried like it was his own creation. I had always been close to him in a quiet way. Sunday afternoons when I was younger, sitting in his study while he read financial reports and I worked on homework. He never asked about grades. Never asked about achievements. He would just glance over occasionally and say things like, "Are you learning something useful, or just memorizing?" At the time, I did not understand what he meant. Now,
I did.
The first time Ethan met him was not planned. It was a Sunday, late afternoon. I had stopped by my parents' house to pick up some old documents I needed for a client project. Ethan was with me, waiting in the foyer, hands in his pockets, calm as always. My father was not home. My mother was upstairs. The house was unusually quiet. And then my grandfather walked in.
No announcement.
No warning. Just the soft sound of his cane against the marble floor.
He stopped when he saw us.
His eyes moved from me to Ethan and then back to me. Not confused. Not surprised. Just assessing. I felt it immediately. That shift in the air. The way he looked at Ethan was not the way my parents had. There was no dismissal.
No judgment.
Just curiosity. "You brought someone," he said, his voice steady, measured. I nodded. "This is Ethan." A small pause. My grandfather stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. He extended his hand. Ethan shook it without hesitation. Firm.
Direct.
No performance. No attempt to impress. And then something happened I did not expect. My grandfather did not let go immediately. Not in a rude way. Just a fraction longer than normal. Long enough to feel something. To read something. He released his hand slowly, his eyes still on Ethan's face. Interesting, he said quietly. That was it. One word. But it landed heavier than anything my father had ever said. We sat in the living room for a few minutes. No one rushed to fill the silence. My grandfather asked a few questions. Not about titles. Not about income. Different questions. What do you pay attention to? Where do you see inefficiency most often? What do people consistently misunderstand? Ethan answered each one without hesitation. Not long answers. Not rehearsed. Just precise. People mistake movement for progress. They optimize for visibility instead of value. Most inefficiencies are tolerated because they benefit someone in power. My grandfather nodded slowly after each response. Not approving. Not praising. Just acknowledging. And then he asked the question. The one that changed everything, even though I did not realize it at the time. And what do you do with that information? Ethan met his gaze.
Calm.
Unflinching. I position myself where the correction becomes inevitable. Silence. Real silence. Not uncomfortable. Not awkward. Just full. My grandfather leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the armrest of his chair. A habit he had when something caught his attention. I see, he said. Another pause. Then he looked at me. Not at Ethan. At me. How long have you known him? About 2 months, I answered. He nodded once. Then looked back at Ethan. That is enough time to recognize patterns. And then he stood up. Conversation over.
Just like that. No goodie. No commentary.
He walked out of the room the same way he had entered. Quiet. Controlled. Leaving something behind that I could not quite define. Later that evening, as Ethan and I walked back to my apartment, I asked him what that was. What do you mean, he said. That interaction.
He does not do that with people.
Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he does not waste time. I waited for more. There was always more with Ethan. But this time there was not. Just that one sentence. And somehow it explained everything. Over the next few weeks, something subtle began to change. Not in my parents. They remained exactly the same. Dismissive.
Certain.
Uninterested. But my grandfather started watching. He did not call. He did not reach out. But I would notice it. At family dinners, his attention would shift slightly when Ethan spoke. Not obvious. Not enough for anyone else to catch. But I saw it. And once you see something like that, you cannot unsee it. One evening, as we were leaving one of those dinners, my grandfather stopped me near the doorway. Not Ethan. Just me. His voice was low. Measured. That man, he said, is not what he appears to be. My chest tightened slightly. What do you mean? He looked past me for a second, where Ethan was standing by the car, checking his phone, completely at ease. Then he looked back at me. It is not about what he has, he said. It is about what he does not need to show. A pause. Just long enough for the weight of that to settle. Be careful, he added. Not as a warning. Not as fear. Something else. Something closer to respect. Then he walked away. And, for the first time since I met Ethan, I felt it clearly. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Something sharper. The realization that I was standing in the middle of something much bigger than I understood. My family saw a man with no visible status. No obvious power. No credentials they recognized. But my grandfather saw something else. Something hidden. Something controlled. Something dangerous in a way that did not need to announce itself. And that was the moment the question changed. It was no longer, who is Ethan? It became, what exactly has he been seeing this entire time that the rest of us missed? The engagement dinner was not my idea. It was never going to be. In my family, nothing that involved an audience was ever spontaneous. It was curated, positioned, engineered for maximum visibility. My father called me on a Thursday at exactly 9:18 in the morning. I remember because I had just sent an invoice to a client and was calculating whether I could afford to upgrade my design software that month. His name appeared on my phone, and for a second, just a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I did not. I answered. Hannah, he said, no greeting, no warmth. We're hosting a dinner next week. You and him will be there. Not a question. A directive. I closed my laptop slowly. What kind of dinner? A pause. Just long enough to remind me who was in control. An introduction, he said. If you're going to continue making decisions like this, it is better to address it publicly. Address it publicly. Like I was a problem that needed to be managed. I could have said no. I could have refused. But something in me did not want to. Not because I needed their approval. That part was already gone. But because I wanted to see it clearly, without illusion, without hope softening the edges. I wanted to understand exactly how far they were willing to go. We will be there, I said. The line went quiet for a moment. Then he hung up.
No good die.
Just silence. The dinner was held at a private club in Midtown. The kind of place where the lighting is always slightly dim, the chairs are heavier than necessary, and every conversation feels like it is being measured. 80 guests. I counted. Business partners. Investors. People who had known my family for decades. People who had watched me grow up and decided at some point that I did not matter. I arrived with Ethan at 7:03 p.m., 3 minutes after the official start time. In my family, being slightly late was a signal. Not disrespect. Control. Ethan did not comment on it. He just walked beside me, steady, unhurried, like the room would adjust to him instead of the other way around. And strangely, it did. Conversations paused for a fraction of a second when we entered. Heads turned. Not dramatically. Just enough. My mother approached first, her smile perfectly measured. Hannah, she said, air-kissing my cheek. Then she looked at Ethan. A brief scan. Head to toe. Efficient. Clinical. Ethan, she said, as if testing how the name sounded.
No worms. No hostility.
Just assessment. Welcome. He nodded once. Thank you for having me.
Calm.
Polite. Nothing extra. My father did not come over immediately. Of course he did not. That would have suggested this mattered to him personally. Instead, he waited. Let the room settle. Let the attention build. And then, at 7:22 p.m., he moved. Straight posture. Measured steps. Every movement calculated. He stopped in front of us, his eyes landing on Ethan first.
Not me.
Never me. So, he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention without raising it. You are the one. Not a question. A statement. Ethan met his gaze. I am. A small pause. My father's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Something sharper. Tell me, he continued, what exactly do you offer my daughter? There it was. Not disguised. Not softened. Just direct. A transaction question. Value. Return. Ethan did not react. Not even a flicker. Partnership, he said simply. My father tilted his head slightly, like he had expected something else. Something more measurable. And financially, he pressed. A few people nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. I could feel it. That shift. The room tightening. Ethan's expression did not change. We are stable, he said. Stable. That word landed wrong in a room built on excess. My father let out a quiet breath through his nose. Almost a laugh. Stable, he repeated. Then he turned, just slightly, addressing the people around us now. Expanding the moment. Making it public. My daughter, he said, has chosen stability over opportunity. A few polite chuckles. Not loud. Just enough to signal alignment. I felt it then. Not embarrassment. Not even anger. Something colder. Clarity. This was not about concern. Not about protection. This was positioning. And then he delivered it.
Clean. Precise. Designed to land.
Let me be clear, he said, turning back to me now. If you continue with this arrangement, there will be consequences. A pause. Just long enough for every word to settle into the room.
No inheritance.
Another beat. No trust fund. And then, softer, but somehow louder. You will be on your own. Silence. Complete. 80 people holding their breath without realizing it. Waiting. Watching. Measuring. I did not speak immediately. Not because I was shocked, but because I wanted to feel it fully, without reacting too quickly. This was the moment, the one that would define everything after. I turned to Ethan, just for a second, looking for something, anything, a signal, and there it was again, that same expression.
Calm. Certain.
Unmoved. He reached for my hand, his grip steady, grounding. And then he said it, not to my father, not to the room, just to me, quiet enough that only I could hear. It is okay. That was it. No defense.
No argument.
No attempt to prove anything.
Just certainty.
And in that moment, something inside me settled. The noise of the room, the weight of my father's words, the years of trying to fit into a system that was never built for me. It all went quiet. I turned back to my father, met his gaze, and for the first time, I did not feel smaller. Then I guess, I said, my voice steady, I will be on my own. Another pause. But this one felt different. Not heavy. Not oppressive. Open. My father studied my face for a second, like he was recalculating something that no longer made sense. Then he nodded once. Decision made. Very well, he said. And just like that, it was done.
No dramatic exit.
No raised voices. Just a line drawn.
Clean.
Final.
Public.
And as the room slowly returned to its quiet conversations, as glasses clinked and voices rose back to their usual controlled levels, I realized something I had not expected. I did not feel like I had lost anything. Because for the first time in my life, I had chosen something that was not measured by their standards. And standing there in a room full of people who could not see it yet, I knew this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something they would not understand until it was far too late. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came quietly, precisely, one by one. The first thing that disappeared was access. 48 hours after that dinner, I woke up at 6:12 in the morning to a notification on my phone. Your account access has been restricted. Not declined. Not insufficient funds. Restricted. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, waiting for it to correct itself. It did not. I opened my banking app. The trust account that had been there my entire adult life, $18 million, was gone. Not reduced. Not frozen.
Gone.
Like it had never existed. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone still in my hand, and I expected something. Panic.
Fear.
Regret. But what I felt instead was stillness. Not because it did not matter, but because I had already seen it coming. That night at the dinner was not a threat.
It was a contract.
And I had accepted the terms. I stood up slowly, walked into the kitchen, and started making coffee like I did every morning. Same routine. Same movements. Water.
Beans.
Filter. Because if everything was about to change, I wanted at least one thing to stay the same. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, his hair slightly messy, still half asleep. He looked at me for a second longer than usual. Noticing. Always noticing. Something shifted, he said. Not a question. I nodded once. It is done, I replied. He did not ask for details. Did not ask for numbers. He just leaned against the counter, watching me pour the coffee. Good, he said quietly.
Good.
That word landed in a way I did not expect. Not dismissive. Not indifferent. Intentional. Like this was not a loss. It was a transition. Later that afternoon, the second consequence arrived. My phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. Private number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something told me not to. Hello. A familiar voice.
Cold.
Controlled. Your cards have been deactivated, my father said.
No greeting. No explanation.
Just confirmation. All of them? I asked. A brief pause. All of them? Of course. Efficiency. If you're going to remove leverage, you remove all of it. Understood. I said. Silence on the line. I could feel him waiting. Not for a response. For a reaction. Something emotional. Something that would confirm his decision had impact.
I did not give it to him.
Is there anything else? Asked my voice even. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. No, he said finally. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen. That was it.
No lecture. No anger.
Just execution.
Clean.
Final. By the end of the week, everything tied to my family was gone. The apartment lease that had been under a corporate structure I never questioned terminated. The car reassigned. Even the small monthly transfers my mother used to send without comment stopped. It was almost impressive. The level of coordination.
The speed.
Like they had been prepared for this long before I realized it was even a possibility. I moved out 3 days later. A one-bedroom apartment in Queens. 980 square feet. Rent was $1,200 a month. The building was older. The floors creaked slightly when you walked. The windows did not block out all the street noise. It was normal. Completely normal. I stood in the middle of the empty living room that first night, looking around at the blank walls, the single overhead light casting a soft yellow glow, and I waited again. For the feeling. The one I thought was supposed to come.
Loss.
Regret.
Fear.
But instead, I felt something else.
Space.
Not physical space. Internal. Like a pressure I had been carrying for years had quietly lifted without me noticing. Ethan set a small box down on the kitchen counter, unpacking it without urgency. A few plates. 2 glasses. Minimal. Intentional. He moved through the apartment like he had already accepted it before we even got there. "We will need a desk here," he said, gesturing toward the corner near the window. Not if. Not maybe. Just certainty. I watched him for a moment, something I had started doing more often, trying to understand what he saw that I did not. "You are not worried," I said. Not a question. He looked up briefly, meeting my eyes.
About what?
About this. I gestured around us. Everything. He considered that for a second. Then he shook his head slightly. No, a pause. Just enough to feel the weight of it. "Why not?" I asked. He set the glass he was holding down carefully before answering. "Because nothing essential has been removed." I frowned slightly. $18 million feels essential. A small smile. Not amused. Not dismissive. Just understanding. "That was access," he said. "Not capability." I let that sit for a second.
Trying to process it.
Access. Not capability. In my family, those two things were the same. Always had been. If you had access, you had power. If you lost access, you lost everything. But Ethan was operating under a completely different system. And what about security? I asked. That was security. He shook his head again gently. No, he said. That was dependency. Silence. Real silence. The kind that does not need to be filled. I walked over to the window, looking out at the street below.
Cars passing.
People moving. Life continuing exactly the same way it had the day before. The world had not shifted. Just my position in it. "So, what do we have now?" I asked, still looking outside. I heard him move behind me, felt his presence without turning around.
"Freedom," he said.
The word landed softly, but it stayed. And for the first time since everything had been taken, I felt it clearly. Not as a concept, not as an idea, as something real, something tangible. Because for the first time in my life, there was nothing left to lose that had been given to me by someone else. Everything from this point forward would be mine. And standing there in that small apartment, with the city moving around us like nothing had changed, I realized something that would take me weeks to fully understand. My father thought he had reduced my options, but what he had actually done was remove every constraint I had been living under without realizing it. And Ethan had known that from the beginning. The first week felt controlled. Not easy, not comfortable, but controlled. I woke up every morning at 6:30, made coffee, opened my laptop, and worked. Same as before. Same rhythm. Same focus. My business did not collapse just because my last name stopped opening doors. If anything, it became sharper, more intentional. I tracked every dollar, every client, every hour. I knew exactly how much came in and exactly where it went. $4,300 that month. Rent took $1,200. Utilities, $260. Groceries around $400. Software subscriptions. 180. It was tight. Not impossible. Just precise. And for a while, that precision felt good. Like I was finally operating inside something real. Something measurable that actually reflected my effort instead of someone else's decision. But then something shifted. Not externally. Internally. It started small. A thought that stayed a little longer than it should have. A question that did not go away. What if they were right? I remember exactly when it hit me. 11:47 p.m. Sitting at the small desk Ethan had placed near the window, staring at a client proposal I had rewritten 3 times already. I could hear the city outside.
Cars passing.
A siren in the distance. Life continuing. And suddenly my chest felt tight. Not panic. Not exactly. More like pressure. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a second. And then it came.
Clear. Sharp.
Uninvited. What if you gave up everything for something that is not real? I opened my eyes immediately, like I could physically stop the thought from forming. But it was already there. And once it is there, you cannot unthink it. I stood up, pacing slowly across the room, trying to push it away. But it kept coming back. Different versions. Same core. What if he is not who you think he is? What if you misread everything? What if your father was not wrong, just early? I hated that last one, because it sounded like something my father would say.
Calm.
Logical.
Cutting.
I looked over at Ethan. He was sitting on the couch, reading. Same posture. Same calm presence he always had. Like nothing had changed. Like nothing needed to. And for the first time, that unsettled me. Not because he was doing something wrong, but because he was not doing anything differently.
No urgency.
No visible concern.
No shift.
It did not match the situation. Not in the way I had been taught to measure situations. Ethan, I said. My voice sounded different. Tighter than usual. He looked up immediately. Not surprised. Just attentive. Yes. I hesitated for a second. Not because I did not know what to say, but because saying it out loud would make it real. And once it is real, you have to face it. Are we okay? The question hung there.
Simple. Direct.
But underneath it, everything. Money. Stability. The future I had walked away from. He did not answer immediately. Not because he did not have an answer, but because he was choosing the exact moment to give it. He set his book down slowly, stood up, and walked toward me. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just steady. Define okay, he said. I let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh. Not quite frustration. Financially, I said. Long term. Everything. He studied my face for a moment. Not judging. Not dismissing. Just understanding exactly where the question was coming from. You are asking if you made a mistake, he said quietly. I did not respond. I did not need to. We both knew that was what I meant. He nodded slightly, like he had expected this moment. Like it was part of the process.
No, he said. Just that. No explanation.
No numbers. No reassurance layered in detail. Just certainty. And for a second that was not enough. That is not an answer. I said, my voice sharper now. I walked away from $18 million. From security. From everything I have ever known. I need more than no. Silence. A beat.
2.
3. And then he stepped closer. Not invading space. Just closing the distance enough that I could feel the shift. Hannah, he said, my name steady grounding. If I told you exactly what you want to hear right now, you would not believe it. That stopped me. Not because of what he said, but because of how accurate it felt. He continued. So instead, I am going to ask you something. A pause. Do you trust your ability to see? I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means, he said, everything you have observed so far about me, about how I think, about how I move, was that random? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped, because the honest answer was no. Nothing about him had ever felt random. Everything had been consistent, controlled, intentional. He watched my expression shift. He saw it. Of course he did. Then the only variable left, he said quietly, is whether you trust your own judgment or theirs. Silence. Heavy this time, because that was the real question. Not about money, not about the future, about me, about whether I believed what I had seen or what I had been told to believe my entire life. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked, not trying to find proof, not trying to decode him,
just seeing.
the calm, the consistency, the complete absence of fear. And slowly, something inside me settled again. Not completely,
Not permanently.
but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to choose. I trust what I have seen, I said finally, my voice quieter now, but steadier. He nodded once.
Good, he said.
And then, just like that, the tension eased.
Not gone.
But managed. And as I sat back down at my desk, reopening the proposal, I realized something I had not understood before. Doubt was not a sign I had made the wrong decision. It was a sign I had stepped outside the system that had always made decisions for me. And for the first time, I was responsible for trusting myself, which was far more uncomfortable and far more powerful than anything my family had ever offered. The first time Ethan introduced me to his world, it did not look like anything I expected. There was no office building with glass walls and a receptionist greeting us by name.
No boardroom. No visible hierarchy.
Just a quiet restaurant on the edge of the city. Not expensive. Not cheap. The kind of place you would walk past without noticing unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. We arrived at 6:58 p.m. 2 minutes early. Ethan held the door open for me, his movements as measured as always. Inside, the lighting was soft. Conversations low. Nothing about the space suggested importance. And yet, something felt different. I could not explain it at first. Just a subtle awareness. Like the room was more intentional than it appeared. A man at the corner table stood up the moment Ethan stepped inside. Not dramatically. Not drawing attention. Just immediate. Good evening, he said, his tone respectful, controlled. Not casual. Not performative. Respectful. Ethan nodded once. Good evening, Daniel. Daniel. No last name.
No introduction.
Just recognition. The man glanced at me briefly, not dismissing me, not overanalyzing, just acknowledging my presence as part of Ethan's. This must be Hannah, he said. I felt it then. That small shift. The way he said my name. Not asking. Not confirming.
Knowing.
Yes. Ethan replied simply. We sat down at the table. No menus were handed to us. No orders were taken. And within 3 minutes, food started arriving. Perfect timing. Perfect pacing. No questions asked. I looked at Ethan, raising an eyebrow slightly. You ordered in advance? He shook his head once. No, a pause. They understand patterns. Patterns. That word again. It followed him everywhere. The conversation started slowly.
Light.
Controlled. But then it shifted.
Subtly.
Gradually. Into something else. Numbers were mentioned. Not casually.
Precisely.
Timelines. Market movements. Positions. Not explained. Not simplified. Just stated. And what surprised me most was not what they were saying. It was how they were saying it. No one was trying to prove anything. No one was dominating the conversation. It was not about who spoke the most. It was about who understood the most. At one point, Daniel turned to Ethan. The adjustment in Q3, is it still aligned? Ethan did not answer immediately. He took a sip of water, set the glass down, and then said, It will be. The pressure has not peaked yet.
No explanation. No elaboration.
Just certainty. Daniel nodded once. Like that was enough. Like that answer carried weight I could not yet see. I sat there, listening, trying to follow the threads of a conversation that felt just slightly out of reach. Not because it was too complex, but because it was operating on a level I had never been exposed to before. This was not business as I had seen it in my father's world. There was no posturing. No titles being used as leverage. No visible power plays. Everything was quieter, more controlled, and somehow more absolute. After about an hour, another man joined us. Older, mid-60s. Simple gray suit. No watch. No visible indicators of wealth. And yet the moment he sat down, the entire dynamic shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, just subtly, like gravity had adjusted. Ethan, he said, nodding slightly.
No handshake. No introduction.
Just acknowledgement. Ethan leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but attentive. Good to see you. The man's eyes moved to me briefly. Assessing, not dismissing, not impressed, just calculating. You brought her, he said. Again, not a question. Ethan nodded once. Yes. A pause. The man looked at me again. This time longer. Not uncomfortable. Just thorough. Then she should understand where she is sitting. My chest tightened slightly. Not fear. Awareness. Ethan did not intervene. Did not redirect. He let the moment stand. I met the man's gaze. Held it. I am listening, I said. My voice steady. He nodded once. Acceptable. And then, the conversation continued. But now, I was paying attention differently. Not to the words. To the structure. The flow. The way decisions were being shaped without being explicitly stated. The way influence moved through the room without needing to be announced. And slowly, something started to become clear. These were not people reacting to the market. They were anticipating it. Positioning before movement. Adjusting before impact. It was not about control. It was about understanding the system deeply enough that control became unnecessary. When we left the restaurant, it was 9:12 p.m. The air outside was cooler, quieter. The city felt different after what I had just experienced, like I had stepped into something hidden and then back out again. I walked beside Ethan in silence for a few minutes, processing everything. Finally, I stopped. Who are they? I asked. He looked at me, his expression calm as always.
People who see, he said.
That was not enough. Not this time. That is not an answer, I said. He tilted his head slightly, considering. Then he said, it is the only answer that matters right now. Again, that phrase. The same one from before. And this time, I felt it differently. Not frustrating. Not evasive. Intentional. Like there was a sequence to all of this. A timing I was not yet aligned with. I looked back toward the restaurant. The door had already closed. The moment contained. They respect you, I said quietly. Not a question. A realization. He did not respond immediately. Then, after a small pause, he said, they respect outcomes. Outcomes. Not titles. Not appearances. Not family names. Results. Real. Measurable. Unavoidable. And for the first time, I began to understand the scale of what I had stepped into. My family operated in a world where power was displayed. Visible. Structured. Defined by what people could see and measure. Ethan operated in a world where power did not need to be seen to be absolute. And as we walked back to the apartment, the city lights reflecting off the windows around us, I felt it again. That quiet, underlying tension. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Something else. The awareness that I was standing at the edge of something much bigger than I had ever known. And that whatever Ethan was building, whatever he was part of, had already begun moving long before my father decided to cut me off. Which meant this was never a reaction. It was always a plan. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning at exactly 8:03 a.m. No sender name.
No branding.
Just a plain white envelope slipped under our apartment door, like it did not belong to any system I recognized. I almost missed it. I stepped over it on my way to the kitchen, made coffee, opened my laptop, and only noticed it when I walked back. It was heavier than it should have been.
Not thick.
Just deliberate. I turned it over in my hands for a second before opening it. Inside, there was a single card.
Black. Matte. No logo.
Just embossed lettering in silver. Private Financial Summit. Thursday. 7 p.m. Midtown.
No RSVP. No instructions.
Just an address. And at the bottom, in smaller text, attendance confirmed. My chest tightened slightly. Not fear. Recognition. This was not an invitation. It was a placement. Ethan walked into the room a few seconds later, already dressed, already awake in a way that suggested he had been thinking long before I opened my eyes. He glanced at the card in my hand once. Just once. And then he nodded. "Good," he said. That word again.
Good.
Like everything was aligning exactly as expected. I held the card up slightly. "You knew about this?" Not a question. He did not deny it. "Yes." A pause. I waited. He did not elaborate. Of course he did not. "What is it?" I asked. He walked over, took the card from my hand, and set it down on the table carefully, like it was part of a sequence that should not be disrupted. "It is where things become visible," he said. Visible. The word stayed with me, because everything up to this point had been the opposite.
Hidden.
Subtle. Implied. And now something was about to surface. The next 3 days moved differently. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Just focused. Ethan did not change his routine. That was the first thing I noticed.
No sudden meetings.
No calls taken in private.
No visible preparación.
And somehow that felt more significant than if he had done everything differently, because it meant whatever was about to happen was already in motion. Thursday arrived without ceremony. 6:12 p.m. I stood in front of the mirror in our apartment, adjusting a dress I had not worn in months. Not because I could not, but because I had not needed to. It was simple, black, clean lines, no statement.
No excess.
I looked at my reflection for a moment longer than usual, not because I was unsure how I looked, but because I was aware of something shifting. This was not the same version of me who had stood in that private club weeks earlier. The one waiting for approval. The one measuring herself through someone else's system. That version was gone. Ethan stepped into the room behind me, adjusting his jacket slightly. No designer label.
No visible branding.
Just precise. Intentional. "Ready?" he asked. I met his eyes in the mirror. A small pause. Then I nodded. Yes. The building was in Midtown. 47 floors. Glass exterior. The kind of place my father would have described as appropriate. We entered at exactly 6:58 p.m. 2 minutes early. The lobby was quiet.
No reception desk.
No sign-in. Just a man standing near the elevators, his posture straight, his attention immediate. "Good evening," he said, looking directly at Ethan. Not at me. At Ethan. "You are expected." Expected. Not welcomed. Not invited. Expected. Ethan nodded once. "We are." The man stepped aside, gesturing toward a private elevator already waiting.
No buttons pressed.
No instructions given. Just access. We stepped inside. The doors closed silently. No music.
No announcements.
Just the soft hum of movement as we rose. I watched the numbers change. 12, 18, 26, 34. And then, 47, the doors opened. And for a moment, everything went still. The room was larger than I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out below like a map. And inside, around 50 people. Maybe more. All positioned in small clusters. Conversations low. Controlled. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. This was not a networking event. This was not a social gathering. This was something else. Something structured without being announced. And then I saw them. My father. Standing near the center of the room, speaking to a group of men I recognized immediately. Investors. Partners. People who had shaped entire industries. My mother nearby.
Composed. Perfect.
Like nothing had ever shifted. Like I had never left. My chest tightened slightly. Not fear. Not hesitation. Just awareness. This was the convergence point. Two systems. Two worlds. About to intersect. Ethan did not slow down. Did not hesitate. He walked forward, his pace steady, his presence unchanged. And something happened as we moved through the room. Conversations paused. Not fully. Just slightly. Enough to register. People noticed him. Not in the way they noticed status. Not in the way they noticed wealth. Something else. Recognition. Subtle. Controlled. But real. A man near the window stepped back slightly as we passed. Another nodded once. not greeting, not acknowledgement, just alignment. And then my father saw me. The shift was immediate. His expression did not change dramatically. That was not his style.
But I saw it.
That fraction of a second where his control recalibrated. His eyes moved from me to Ethan and stayed there a fraction longer than necessary. He excused himself from the group, his movements precise, calculated, as he approached us. Hannah, he said, his voice even controlled.
No worms. No hostility.
Just neutral. Then his gaze shifted to Ethan. I did not expect to see you here. Not a question. A statement. But underneath it, something else. Something I had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. Ethan met his gaze.
Calm.
Unmoved. You were always going to, he said. A pause. Just long enough for the meaning to land. My father's jaw tightened slightly. Not visible to most.
But I saw it.
Because I had spent my entire life learning how to read him. This is a closed room, my father said, his tone sharpening just slightly. Access is not accidental. Ethan nodded once. I agree. Silence. Heavy now, because something had shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that my father could feel it. Enough that I could feel it. And then a voice from across the room cut through the tension. We are about to begin. Not loud, but absolute. The kind of voice that does not need volume to command attention. The room adjusted immediately. Conversations ended. Positions shifted. And in that moment, I understood. This was not just a gathering. This was a decision point. Something was about to be revealed. Not privately.
Publicly.
And as I stood there, between the man who had built my entire understanding of power and the man who had quietly dismantled it without ever raising his voice, I realized something with complete clarity. Whatever was about to happen next was not going to be subtle. It was going to be final. The room did not need to be called to order. It simply aligned. Conversations faded without anyone raising their voice. Glasses were set down. Bodies shifted, not randomly, but with quiet precision, like everyone already knew exactly where they were supposed to be. I stood beside Ethan, aware of my father just a few feet away, but for the first time in my life, he was no longer the center of the room. And he knew it. I could see it in the way his shoulders held tension just slightly higher than usual. The way his eyes moved, not scanning for control, but searching for information. Something he did not have yet. A man stepped forward near the center. Mid-60s. Gray suit. The same man from the restaurant.
No introduction. No announcement.
He did not need one. Thank you for being here, he said, his voice calm, even, carrying across the room without effort. We will proceed directly. No small talk.
No formalities.
Just movement. A screen behind him came to life.
No logo. No branding.
Just data.
Clean.
Structured. Intentional. I felt it immediately. This was not a presentation. This was a disclosure. Over the past 18 months, the man continued, a series of strategic positions have been consolidated across multiple sectors. Numbers appeared. Not exaggerated. Not inflated. Just precise. Percentages. Acquisition timelines. Market shifts. And then names. Companies. Real ones. Large ones. Some of them connected to my father's network.
I saw it.
The moment he recognized it too. His posture shifted slightly. Subtle. Almost invisible. But I had spent my entire life studying those micro-expressions. He was no longer just listening. He was calculating.
Fast.
The man continued. These movements were not isolated. They were coordinated. A pause. Just enough for the weight of that word to settle. Coordinated. Not reactive. Not opportunistic. Intentional.
Designed.
And then the next slide appeared. A structure. Not a company. Not a brand. Something else. A network. Interconnected. Layered. Invisible unless you knew how to read it. I felt my breath catch.
Slightly.
Not because I understood all of it, but because I understood enough. This was scale. Not visible scale. Not the kind my family displayed. Something deeper. Something embedded. And then the man stepped back slightly. not leaving the space, just opening it. The individual responsible for this alignment, he said, will now speak. Silence. Complete. Because everyone in that room knew this was the moment. And then, Ethan stepped forward. Not quickly. Not slowly. Exactly the pace he always moved. Controlled. Unrushed.
Certain.
I felt it again. That shift. The room adjusting. Not reacting. Aligning. He did not look at me. Not because he was ignoring me, but because he did not need to check anything. Everything was already set. He stood at the front, his posture relaxed, his presence unchanged. No performance.
No escalation.
Just clarity. Good evening, he said. Simple.
Direct. No introduction. No credentials.
Because in that room, none were necessary. A few heads nodded slightly. Recognition. Confirmation. He continued. 18 months ago, a mispricing occurred across multiple sectors.
His voice was calm.
Even. But every word landed with precision. Not because the data was unavailable, but because the interpretation was flawed. I glanced at my father. His eyes were locked on Ethan now. Fully.
No distraction.
No control. Just attention. When systems become too confident, Ethan continued, they stop seeing variables that do not fit their model. A pause.
Small.
Intentional. That creates opportunity. The word hung in the air. Opportunity. In my father's world, that meant leverage. Expansion.
Growth.
But here, it meant something else. Correction. I could feel it. The shift in the room. Not surprise. Not shock. Recognition. Like they had been watching this unfold, waiting for it to be named. Ethan gestured slightly toward the screen. Positions were established. Quietly. Incrementally. Across entities that did not appear connected. My chest tightened slightly. Because I understood now. This was not one move. This was hundreds. Thousands. Layered over time. Invisible individually. Unavoidable collectively. And as of this quarter, he said, his voice steady, those positions have reached convergence. Convergence. The word landed like a final point in a calculation. And then the next slide appeared. A single name. My father's company. Bennett Holdings. My breath caught, not because I was surprised, but because I knew this was it. The intersection point. Ethan did not look at my father. He did not need
to.
Certain entities, he continued, were particularly exposed due to structural assumptions that were no longer valid. A pause. Just long enough. Bennett Holdings is one of them. Silence. Absolute. Not a single movement. Not a single sound. And, for the first time,
I saw it. Clearly.
My father was no longer in control of the narrative. He was inside it. I watched his expression carefully. The way his jaw tightened. The way his eyes moved, not with certainty, but with recalculation. Fast. Precise. But reactive. For the first time. Ethan continued. Over the past 6 months, controlling interest has been acquired through a series of aligned positions. Another slide. Numbers. Percentages. Ownership structures.
Clean.
Undeniable. My father's company was no longer his. Not fully. Not in the way he believed it was. And then Ethan said the one thing that changed everything. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just clearly. I am the majority holder. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Because the impact was immediate. Total. I did not look at the screen. I looked at my father. Because this was not about the data. This was about the moment. His face did not collapse. He was too controlled for that. But something shifted. Deep. Structural. The certainty was gone. Replaced by something else. Something I had never seen in him before. Recognition. Not of loss. Of miscalculation. And, in that moment, I understood everything. The coffee shop. The quiet dinners. The questions. The patterns. The calm. This had never been about proving anything. It had never been about responding to my father. This had been in motion long before I entered the picture. Long before my father made his decision. Ethan had not reacted to my family. He had already positioned around them. And as the room remained silent, as every person present processed what had just been made visible, I felt it. Not shock. Not disbelief. Something else. Something steady. Something certain. The realization that the man my father had dismissed as having nothing had never needed anything from him in the first place. And that everything my father thought he controlled had already been quietly taken out of his hands without him even realizing it. No one spoke immediately after Ethan finished. Not because they did not understand, but because they did. Completely. And in rooms like that, understanding does not create noise. It creates silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to separate before from after. I stood there, my eyes still on my father, watching something I had never seen in 29 years. Not anger. Not denial. Not even resistance. Calculation. Fast. Precise. But incomplete. Because for the first time, he did not have all the variables. He took a step forward. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Controlled. Always controlled. That is not possible, he said, his voice even, but tighter than before. Not loud. But it carried. Enough for everyone to hear. Ethan did not react. He did not defend. He did not explain. He simply looked at him. Calm. Steady. It is already done, he said. No emphasis. No force. Just final. A pause. My father's eyes flicked briefly toward the screen, then back to Ethan. Rechecking. Recalculating. Trying to locate the error. Because in his world there was always an error. Always a variable that could be adjusted. Controlled. Fixed. You acquired positions, my father said slowly, but that does not translate to operational control. There it was. The counter. Structured. Logical. Familiar. Ethan nodded slightly. You are correct, he said. Agreement. Not resistance. That alone shifted the energy. Because my father was prepared for opposition. Not alignment. Which is why, Ethan continued, board reconstitution was initiated last quarter. Another slide appeared. Quietly. No dramatic transition. Just data. Names. Dates. Votes. I watched my father's expression carefully. That was the moment. The exact moment something inside him adjusted. Not outwardly, but internally. The realization that this was not a position. It was a sequence. Already executed. Already completed. You were not present for the final vote, Ethan said, his voice still calm. Proxy alignment reached the required threshold. Silence again. But this time it was different. Not anticipatory. Conclusive. My father did not speak immediately. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. Not because he was incapable, but because the structure he operated within had already been altered. And then he did something unexpected. He turned to me. Not fully. Just enough. His eyes met mine, and for a brief second, the entire room disappeared. It was just us. The version of him I had spent my entire life trying to understand. And the version of me he had never fully seen. You knew about this, he said. Not a question. A statement. I held his gaze. I did not look away. Not this time. No, I said. My voice steady. Honest. Because it was. I had not known the details. Not the structure. Not the timing. But I had known something. Something deeper. That this was not random. That this was not unstable. That this was intentional. He studied my face for a moment longer. Searching. Not for information. For confirmation. And then he nodded once. Slight. Controlled. Accepting the answer, even if he did not understand it. He turned back to Ethan. The room came back into focus. The people. The silence. The weight of what had just shifted. What do you want? My father asked. Direct. Clean. No emotion. Just the question that always mattered most in his world. Terms. Conditions. Leverage. Ethan did not answer immediately. Of course he did not. Timing mattered. He let the silence sit. Let the question exist fully before responding. And then he said, nothing from you. That landed harder than anything else. Because it removed the structure entirely. There was no negotiation. No exchange. No transaction. Just absence. My father's expression tightened slightly. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Something else. Disorientation. Because without a transaction, there was no framework to operate within. That is not how this works, my father said. The words came automatically. Reflex. Ethan tilted his head slightly. It already has, he replied. A pause.
Small. Precise.
The outcome is not dependent on your participation. Silence again. But this time it felt final. Because it was. My father stood there, processing. Not reacting. Not collapsing. Just adjusting to a reality that did not require his agreement. And then something shifted in me. Not externally. Internally. I felt it clearly. The last piece of something I had been carrying for years, falling away. The need to be seen by him. Understood by him. Validated by him. It was gone. Not because I forced it, but because it no longer made sense. The system that created that need no longer existed. I stepped forward slightly. Not into the center. Not into the spotlight. Just enough. Enough to be present. You said I would be on my own, I said, my voice calm, steady. He looked at me again. Fully this time. I continued. A pause. Just enough. And I am fine. The words were not dramatic. Not defiant. Just true.
And
that was the difference. He did not respond. Not because he could not, but because there was nothing to correct. Nothing to challenge. The outcome had already answered the question. And, in that moment, I saw it, not as a daughter, not as someone inside the system, as an observer. My father had not lost everything. Not in the way people would assume. The company would continue. The structure would adapt. The numbers would shift. What he lost was certainty. The belief that he could see all variables, control all outcomes. And that loss was something he had never prepared for. Ethan stepped back slightly, the presentation complete. No closing statement.
no summary.
Because none was needed. The room began to move again. Slowly. Conversations restarting. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just recalibrating. And as I stood there, watching it all settle, I realized something with complete clarity. This was not a victory. Not in the way my family defined it. There was no celebration.
No announcement. No visible dominance.
This was something else. Something quieter. Something more absolute. The moment when reality replaced assumption. And there was nothing left to argue with. We did not leave immediately. That was the first thing I noticed.
No dramatic exit.
No final glance back. No moment designed for impact. Ethan simply stepped away from the center of the room, his role complete, his presence no longer required to hold the space. And the room adjusted. Conversations resumed, but not the same ones. Not with the same tone. There was a subtle shift in posture, in voice, in attention. The kind of shift you only recognize if you have lived inside a system long enough to feel when its balance changes. I stood there for a moment longer, letting it settle. Not the outcome. That was already clear. But the feeling. The absence of something I had carried for years. The need to prove. The need to be seen. The need to matter on someone else's terms. It was gone. Not violently. Not suddenly. Just gone. My father did not approach me again. Not that night. Not in that room. And I understood why. There was nothing left to negotiate. Nothing left to correct. The version of me he had defined no longer existed in a way he could interact with. And, without that, there was no script. My mother, however, did come closer. Not fully. Not directly. She stopped a few feet away, her posture still composed, her expressions still controlled. But there was something different. Something quieter.
Hannah, she said.
Just my name.
No judgment. No correction.
Just acknowledgement. I turned to face her. For a second, I saw something I had not expected. Not regret. Not apology. Something more subtle. Recognition. You look well, she said. The words felt unfamiliar coming from her. Not because they were negative, but because they were not measured. Not strategic. Just observed. I am, I replied. And I was. That was the simplest part of everything that had happened. Not easy, not perfect, but real. And that made all the difference. She nodded once. A small movement. Then she stepped back. Not dismissed. Not excluded. Just repositioned. And that was enough. I found Ethan near the windows, looking out over the city. The lights stretched endlessly, each one representing a system, a structure, a decision being made somewhere by someone who believed they understood how things worked. I stood beside him, without speaking for a moment. The silence felt different now. Not filled with questions. Not waiting for answers. Just complete. It is done, I said quietly. Not asking. Not confirming. Just stating. He nodded once. Yes. A pause. I looked out at the city again. And now? I asked. This time, I was not asking about money, or stability, or position. I was asking something else. Something deeper. He turned slightly toward me, his expression the same as it had always been.
Calm. Certain.
Unmoved by the outcome, because the outcome had never been the point. Now, he said, you build what you actually want. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Because, for the first time, that choice was real. Not influenced. Not filtered. Not measured against someone else's expectations.
Just mine.
The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 a.m.
Same time.
Same routine.
Coffee. Laptop. Work.
Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. My business was still small. My apartment was still modest. The numbers had not suddenly multiplied overnight. But the context had shifted. Completely. I was no longer working to prove something. I was working to build something. And that difference changed everything. A week later, I received an email. No sender name. Just a subject line. Board transition confirmation. I opened it slowly, reading each line carefully. Formal. Language. Legal structure. Finalized positions. And at the bottom, a single line that stood out more than everything else. Your access is not required for continuation. I stared at it for a moment. Then I closed the email, not because it did not matter, but because it no longer defined anything about me. I thought about my father then, not as a figure, not as a force, just as a man who had built a system that worked, until it did not. And I understood something I had not before. He was not wrong. Not entirely. His model had been effective. His decisions had created real outcomes. But his mistake was believing that his way was the only way, that what he could not measure did not exist. And Ethan had never argued against that. He had simply operated outside of it. Quietly.
Precisely.
Until the point where it intersected. And then it was visible. I did not go back. Not to the house. Not to the structure I had grown up in. Not because I could not, but because I did not need to. That part of my life had already ended the moment I chose something different. And for the first time, I was not waiting for permission to begin the next one. A few months later, I was sitting at the same coffee shop where I first met Ethan. Same table.
Same time.
2:14 p.m. A small detail, but it mattered. Because it reminded me where everything had started. Not with power. Not with conflict, but with a conversation, a different way of seeing. I opened my notebook, sketching out a new project. Not because it would impress anyone, not because it would prove anything, but because I wanted to build it. And across from me, Ethan sat quietly, watching the room settle, the same way he always had, the same way he always would. I looked up at him for a moment, a small smile forming without effort. You knew, I said, not accusing, not questioning, just recognizing. He returned the look, his expression unchanged. I understood the pattern, he replied.
Of course he did.
That was the difference. He did not need certainty. He did not need approval. He did not need the system to validate his position. He simply saw it and acted accordingly. I closed my notebook slowly, leaning back in my chair, letting that settle. Because in the end, that was the real shift. Not the money. Not the control. Not the outcome in that room. It was the realization that everything I had been taught to measure had limits. And everything I had been taught to ignore did not. And for the first time in my life, I was building from that understanding, not as someone trying to fit into a system, but as someone who had finally stepped outside of it. And once you do that, there is no going back. Not because you cannot, but because you no longer want to.